My first recollection of having any idea that things were important, I guess I must have been, there are two things really. When I was 5 or 6, we lived across the street from a thing called the Palace of Fine Arts. People who have been to San Francisco will know it. It's this grand Roman-styled structure that is blocks long, that looks like an incredible feat of architecture, and it was built actually in 1915 for the Panama Pacific Exhibition. When I grew up, it was in ruins. It was standing there, it was closed off with a fence around it. It wasn't open to the public. My grandfather used to go over every day and feed the pigeons at this sort of pond in the front that was a scummy pond. Kids that were older than me, who were 9 and 10 in the neighborhood, used to break through or go underneath the fence and get to the top of the rotunda, which is now quite famous, and run around the rotunda. When I was 19, maybe 60, I think it was about that time in, say, 1960, I would have been 6 years old. My mother sat me down and had a long talk with me, telling me that I could never be one of those kids running around the top of the rotunda. And there was two things. One was safety. She clearly did not want me falling and breaking my head, but she gave it to me in a different way. My mother had never gone to college. She wasn't somebody who had an education. She wasn't a professor, but she was a native San Franciscan who had a great love of things San Franciscan. And she was the one who sat me down and said that that is more than just a closed-off set of ruins. It's a piece of architecture. She didn't know at that time the architect who had made it. She didn't understand the history of it, but she understood its importance, and she gave that to me in some way. I looked at the Palace of Fine Arts every day that I walked past it differently after I had had that lecture, because I saw it in a different way. That was about the same time that my grandparents, these Italians who were big film buffs, were raving down the hallway about having seen La Dolce Vita. And I think that must have been about 60 or 61 when Fellini did that. So I'm 6 or 7, and that was also the year that Two Women came out from De Sica. That was the first film I ever remember as a kid that was X-rated as far as the Catholic families were concerned, because it involved a rape scene with Sophia Loren. I wasn't allowed to see that. My constant hectoring, whining, complaining about not being able to see Two Women finally got my parents to take me on almost weekly visits to the De Young Museum. So I was taken to the Legion of Honor. The Young Museum is in Golden Gate Park as a solace for not getting to see Two Women. I didn't think it was a fair trade, but it was a wonderful introduction to their collection of pre-Columbian and sort of early antiquarian ruins from Central and South America, as well as their European collection, and I became a hangout at the De Young Museum. So my introduction to what I call the world of art and architecture was unusual, and a mother's warning about an architectural site across from us, and then being given the De Young Museum as a payoff for not being able to see Two Women. But eventually when I started to be a reader, and I remember very clearly in the 25th anniversary of Anne Frank, that had to be 1962. That book came out in 47, so I would have been 8 years old. I read it that year. There was a big 25th anniversary, and it really struck me. Odd, that book, I think today, but it had a power and an impact that carried through for much of my work later, because it imbued in me something about the Holocaust that stayed with me. And then in the mid-60s, I started to read everything. I was obsessed for a while. Obsessed may be the wrong word. Compulsive. I'm a bit compulsive. I was certainly reading across the board everything that I could get my hands on whether the Soviets or the Americans had a first strike capability. I was so scared by the 1962 standoff on the Cuban Missile Crisis. We used to get under our desk during these tests for whether an atomic weapon might wipe us out and what we should do in case an attack came. I really wanted to know whether we could strike the Soviets and take them out, or whether their ICBMs were bigger and they could strike us and take us out. I never really resolved that to any satisfaction.